sovereignty, for personal family reasons, a lot of stuff is tied into genealogy.
Okay. Can everyone hear me okay? I always want to start out with that. Now, this is a big room. There's still food, so please enjoy. But we're going to go ahead and we have a small program planned for you tonight. Nothing elaborate, but since we have you gathered here. For those of you that don't know me, I've met almost everybody. I'm Larry Landis, Director of the Special Collections and Archives Research Center, OSU Libraries here, and I want to welcome you to Corvallis and OSU and Tribal Archives Institute. We've got a great week planned for you. I want to introduce some of the folks that are involved with the Institute this week, and then we'll turn it over to Jennifer O'Neill, who will give a little keynote address for us. But first, I want to introduce the Tribal Archives Institute Committee, in addition to myself, Natalia Fernandez, who is personing the camera. Natalia is our Oregon Multicultural Librarian. Kit Evanson Morton, who is in my department as the archivist for Instruction, Outreach, and Public Services, and Laura Cray, who is our graduate student assistant on this project, both this summer and last summer. Many of you probably remember her from the tribal site visits that we did. So the four of us are the core group of the committee that put this together, so you can either congratulate us or blame us at the end of the week. So we'll see. We have most of the other instructors here as well. Jennifer O'Neill, whom I will formally introduce here in a moment. David Lewis from the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. James Fox, head of Special Collections and University Archives at the University of Oregon. We do allow ducks on this campus. Karen Estlin, who is the head of Digital Library Services at the University of Oregon. Karen Homo, who is the Electronic Records Archivist at the University of Oregon. So they are some of the other instructors that you will get to know and love this week. Also with us, we have Allison Davis White-Eyes, who is OSU's Director of American Indian Initiatives, and her spouse, Philip Knice. Glad you could join us tonight. They are our guests here. A couple of my colleagues from the OSU Libraries. My supervisor, Sean Sutton, who is our Associate University Librarian for Research and Scholarly Communications. And Sean is about to reach his 2-month anniversary at OSU. So congratulations.
Great party for a 2-month anniversary.
And he came here from the University of Pacific, where he was head of Special Collections and Associate Dean of Libraries. And Faye Chadwell, Faye. Faye is the Donald and Delta Campbell University Librarian and OSU Press Director, and she has been in that position since May of 2011, and prior to that as Interim University Librarian and Press Director, and prior to that as our Associate University Librarian for Collections and Content Management. And we stole her from the University of Oregon about 5 years ago. So those are the special guests. I wanted to mention one other person who unfortunately is no longer with us, but who really laid some of the groundwork for this institute. Many of you probably knew Deanna Kingston, Dr. Deanna Kingston from OSU's Anthropology Department. She invited the University Archives 10 years ago this summer to participate in a grant to develop basically a field school, kind of a mini version of what we're doing this week for the Klamath tribes. It was July 21st and 22nd. I looked at some of that material just this evening. That experience was really my first introduction to tribal archives in Oregon, and certainly opened my eyes as to the importance of the archives and cultural records within the tribal communities. And that really helped lay the groundwork for what we're doing here this week. So I just wanted to give that special recognition to Deanna for involving me and my colleagues in that. I do want to invite Faye up here to say a few words of welcome. So Faye, I'm going to turn it over to you.
I'm proud to have been a duck and now and I live in a platypus household. And I actually like to think of myself as a platypus because we collaborate so much with the road, and that's a good thing. So good evening, and thank you for joining us on a beautiful, sunny evening. We'll have some sun for a while. Here in Corvallis and on our lovely campus at Oregon State University. It's really a privilege and a pleasure of mine to welcome you as participants and instructors for the Tribal Archives Institute. This has been, or I should say, the Institute represents 2 years' work in the making. To design a curriculum around the needs of tribal archives and record management, and that's a wonderful thing. And I think it also represents a really great collaboration to design that curriculum. And moving forward, I think it will represent, I like to think, a collaboration not just between the Ducks and Beavers, but really a collaboration between OSU, among OSU, U of O, other Oregon repositories, and also the tribal archives and repositories of the 9 federally recognized tribes of Oregon. And I want to thank you again for joining us and welcome all of the Institute participants and faculty, as well as some of our other guests.
Thank you, Faye. All right. Jennifer O'Neill is currently the head archivist for the Smithsonian Institution's National Museum of the American Indian. However, she will soon start a new position, and that as the University Archivist at the University of Oregon. So Jennifer is coming home. Her archival journey has included the U.S. State Department, Princeton University, the University of Arizona, and Utah State University, so she is well-traveled. She has master's degrees in library science from the University of Arizona and history from Utah State University. She's very active in the archival community, including the Society of American Archivists, Native American Archives Roundtable, and Native American Protocols Forum Working Group. She's also an advisory board member for the Association of Tribal Archives, Libraries, and Museums. And she is also one of our own, an Oregonian, and a member of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde. So please welcome tonight's keynote speaker and Tribal Archives Institute instructor, Jennifer O'Neill.
Thank you, Larry. It's a pleasure to be here and an honor to be able to speak with you tonight. And first of all, I just wanted to recognize all of the Native ancestors' land who were on, and especially the elders and the ancestors who were here before us. And there's so much that we are trying to do to preserve what they have done so long ago, and so I just want to recognize them. Of course, I also want to recognize the planning committee. I know you all have been working so hard to put this together, and it wouldn't be possible without your very, very hard work. So I thank you so much. You have made the whole experience thus far very fulfilling, and I know this week is just going to be amazing. So thank you so much for your planning, your time, and everything that's went into doing everything thus far. So tonight what I wanted to share with you is just a little bit about my journey as not only an archivist, but a Native archivist, and some of the initiatives I have really been working on for the past 10 years and how that has influenced my career and as well as my research and interests, as well as, in general, the path of tribal archives nationally, sort of the history of what has been happening over the past 30 years even for Native communities to get control of their collections, as well as working with other national repositories to get copies of collections that relate to their tribe. So first of all, I just wanted to talk a bit about how I actually became involved with this subject matter and how it really influenced my path, my career. When I was first going to grad school and at Utah State University, I was lucky enough to be able to also at the same time do an internship at the University Archives and Special Collections. And through that, I was working with collections that were both political in nature, but also regarding cultural heritage. And many of the collections that I was either working with or had interest in, of course, because of my background, I was very interested in working with many of the Native collections and seeing what was in them, and also just subject matter, how they were organized, and how I could become more involved with that process. However, the one thing that I realized as I began working with these collections is, of course, they were wonderful collections, had wonderful subject matter, and really told and encapsulated a lot of the history about many different tribes across the region. But the main issue I saw was that these collections were just sitting there, perhaps being used by scholars, but weren't necessarily being used by tribal community members, or the tribes didn't even know they were there or didn't know what was actually included in many of these different collections. So that got me thinking about, okay, well, how can we get tribal community members more involved with these collections, or how can we help them to know what collections that we have? So I just saw a large disconnect that was happening between mainly larger regional repositories, whether it was university archives or historical societies that I had the pleasure of working in. They had so many wonderful collections regarding tribal archives and their communities, but many of those communities didn't even know that they existed or didn't even know what was included. And also on that same note, the university archive or historical society also didn't often have contact with these communities, and I just saw that there was a great need for having better collaboration and also respect and reciprocity for what could actually be done with a lot of these collections. So that's my initial interest in this topic, not only because of my heritage, but also just because I saw so many ways that could be moved forward with these types of collections, and just so many opportunities that could actually happen. So that's how I actually began doing a lot of research about this and new initiatives that could happen and how we could actually move that forward. And because of my research and my interest in this topic, I was able to become involved with a lot of new initiatives that were happening surrounding this issue, whether it was the research that my own tribe was trying to do, or new policies and procedures that were being suggested to be developed and used throughout the nation. The first, of course, was the protocols for Native American Archival Materials, which was developed in 2006. And I was lucky enough to be able to be asked to serve on the panel of individuals who were gathered to draft this document. And the reason this document was drafted was because there was no real policies or procedures for those repositories that were non-tribal but who had tribal records or collections related to numerous Native communities. So at that time, a group was gathered of about 19 individuals, both archivists, historians, archaeologists, all various types of individuals who had experience working with these types of issues. And from that gathering, which we met for a full week at Northern Arizona University under the leadership of Karen Underhill, who she still serves as the head of the archives there. I don't think for much longer, though. I think she's finally going to retire. But we were lucky enough to, at the end of that meeting, at least have a draft of suggestions we made for, and guidelines for how repositories that had these types of collections could work with tribal communities in creating collaborations, and also how to care for the collections. Not that these repositories weren't already doing a great job at physically caring for the collections, but just different suggestions on how to do that, as well as suggestions on how to move forward with creating collaborations and projects and ideas for moving forward. So lucky enough, then after that meeting time, we then drafted an actual document that was published by this group. And it was the first of its kind, particularly within the United States. There were other nations that had already done this. For example, in Australia, we used their document to be the basis of the document we drafted, and we were lucky enough to be able to have a representative come from that community that actually participated when they also drafted their protocols. So it was wonderful to be able to see what they had done and implement it into this document. Now, the protocols have went forward to various different organizations, such as state and local societies or organizations, or as well as larger organizations, such as the Society of American Archivists. And that was to ensure that this document was widespread, to build advocacy for the document, and to also build up information to share as much as possible. So since that time, that's what numerous members of this group have been doing. We've been going out and sharing this document. Many people have already implemented it, and it's been out for quite some time. However, since that document was drafted, there have been new policies and procedures or documents that have actually been developed that we also want to include. So we're actually going to try to bring this group together again, and going to try to do that by raising money through a grant and drafting new information into the actual policies and procedures. So just adding a little bit more information and gathering the group again, because we always saw the document as being a draft and one that could be revised if possible, because we always knew that it wasn't perfect, that we would have to make changes to it along the way. So that's going to be happening in the next year or so, and we're hoping that that will really provide a way for us to gather the group together again, and again to continue to share the information that we've gathered as we went out and met with all these different organizations and met with people and held forums, particularly at the Society of American Archivists. We held forums at the yearly conferences for 3 years and got a lot of great feedback from groups. And also since that time, we've seen numerous organizations and repositories have wonderful collaborations with tribal communities. So we want to be able to include those case studies in the protocols as well. So I feel very lucky to have been able to participate in this group and draft this document and really help to move forward the ideas of working collaboratively, particularly when you're a repository that has these items but you're not sure how to care for them. And I think the most interesting thing that has stemmed from this work is seeing it grow on a larger scale, meaning a larger issue that we're seeing is cultural heritage, not just in regards to Native American communities, but to all underrepresented communities that are dealing with the same issue, that their collections have ended up in these sorts of repositories, but they want to have more input on either how they're cared for or just more collaboration. And so that's the wonderful thing that we're seeing, as well as just discussion about and advocacy for, is this type of movement toward really inclusion of these types of communities into the repository. And to me, it just is of course common sense, because for whatever type of collection that you have, you would always want to go to the experts or the one that knows the material the best, the subject matter, and ensure that that they are informed and that they are discussed with and get as much information as possible so that you can actually ensure that you're caring for the collections correctly. So that's been kind of my journey and the thing I'm most proud of, just because it's something that has really been out into the community, not just of tribal archivists, but archives in general, and giving them guiding principles, and that it's something tangible that they can actually work from and build from that is so critical. But what I also wanted to share a little bit with you tonight about is just archival activism and advocacy, particularly within the Northwest. As I prepared for this week, and particularly for talking with you tonight, I actually stumbled across some interesting documents. Within the NMAI's Archive Center, we're lucky enough to be able to have the National Congress of American Indian Papers. And within there, of course, are all their documents regarding special projects they worked on or special interest groups, those that were worked on both by individuals and also by the executive director. And we had an intern this summer who was actually finishing processing a second accession that came in of this collection, because as we all know, with large organizations like this, records are always coming in, you're always getting new accretions to the collection. And it was interesting because we were reviewing a lot of his material that he had went over, going through the finding aid and double checking everything. And one thing that really stood out to me, there were all these records about tribal archives that they had, or organizations or conferences they had put together in the early 80s. And I was lucky enough to be able to go through a lot of those records and see what they were meeting about and what they were documenting or trying to do. And I'd actually had a little bit of background about this, but it was a great discovery that I was able to actually see what they were working on, and that I was coming to do, we're still continuing that advocacy that they were trying to do for tribal archives. But as I got into the records and saw what they were trying to work on, it was just great to see that that was actually happening then, instead of it languishing and not moving forward. But I just wanted to share a few things that they had actually put into their documents, because they, of course, were trying to get grant funding, very similar to what we are still doing today, to put a group together to come and gather just as we are, and to meet for a week to learn from representatives, as well as to learn from each other. And the thing that struck me as in one of the documents is the person who was putting together the grant is saying the same thing that we're still saying today, is that for so long these collections have been in other repositories, or because, of course, as Native people, we're very much have an oral tradition, and so many of the records aren't always going to be tangible, but intangible. And I just find it so interesting that we are still dealing with the same struggles. We have been able to overcome many of them, but it was great to see that they were working on these issues, and that we are still continuing to move forward and to meet these same challenges that they were dealing with at the same time. What was also very interesting to me, not only seeing the larger grant that they were working on, which was part of this larger grant they actually produced, which I don't know if many of you are familiar with, but through the Society of American Archivists, they produced an actual pamphlet that's Native American Archives document, and the editor was John Fleckner. He actually is at the Smithsonian. And so that was the part of a tangible publication that they built out of that actual gathering. And it brought together numerous individuals across the nation. But as I went further into looking in some of these records that were put together through NCAI, one that came out was an actual project that they did specifically for Northwest archivists. And so that was interesting to stumble across these documents. It's called Tribal Archives Northwest. And they did this again in the mid to late 80s, gathering together all sorts of archivists across the Northwest, from Oregon to Washington, and brought together these groups to talk about all the different issues that they were facing. And I just wanted to read a few things that they had said in their application, because I think that it signifies many of the same challenges that we're facing, but also just to give some context as what they were dealing with at that time, and how we've either expanded and made so many improvements or not, just to show what they were dealing with then. So it says, the establishment or improvement of tribal archives today is of critical importance to the tribes. Their survival as distinct peoples in this nation depends largely on extent, quality, and accessibility of tribal archives. Many of the elders have passed from this life, and the ratio of very young to very old tribal members continues at an alarming rate to produce a generation of a very high proportion of tribal members under 20 years of age, with those over 60 rapidly disappearing from the tribal community. The preservation of the remnants of their culture falls upon a very young segment of the population who are beset by many distractions and little opportunity to learn the ways or history of other people. This is due in part to inability to access such records as do exist, and almost total lack of training of tribal members in archival matters until very recent years. Even the economic projects of tribes that call for promotional material depicting the history and culture of the tribes is limited by the lack of easy access to historical records of all kinds. Perhaps the most critical need today in the mid-1980s is ready access to historical records which will assist the tribes in establishing their rights to water. Tribes in the Northwest have been meeting within tribes and within groups of tribes, and with all the tribes in the area regarding these issues. In evolving federal policy, court cases, and through legislation, bits of information about tribal use of water, which may have seemed inconsequential, may become critical to a tribe's fight to save its water rights. So as I read through this, we see many things that are the same issues that we're dealing with, the same issues today. As they were specifically dealing with water or recognition, we may be still dealing with those same issues or different issues. But I just find it so interesting when I was reading this that we're dealing with many of the same issues, particularly many elders who are passing away or who they are the ones that know the stories and they are the ones who have that knowledge, as well as the fact that education, archival education, and how important it is that we have this training. And so that is why we are here today. That same issue is occurring, but luckily we have this wonderful institute here this week to be able to provide that education and training, and that we can make improvements to ensure that we can meet these needs, the same needs that they were talking about so early on and that continue, and I'm sure that will continue for numerous years. But luckily, we have the power to make these changes, to continue this new social movement of archival advocacy and archival preservation that will, I'm sure, never go away. But one thing that I wanted to highlight in this new phase that we're moving into, one thing that we do have on our side is new policy tools. And although they may be large in scope or even on a national level, or even if they're ones that are on a tribal level, it's important that we remember the policy tools that are on our side and use those. For example, when I was at the ATOM conference this year and last year as well, we were lucky enough to be able to hear from Walter Echohawk. And he talked extensively about, of course, the U.S. has finally endorsed the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which we all know is a non-binding document, but however, we can still use this document as a policy tool because there are so many parts of the actual document that do refer to cultural heritage and the preservation of our rights, and particularly those of our culture regarding our heritage of archives and of recordings of heritage, both intangible and tangible. So I advocate that we do as much as possible to use these sorts of policy tools to ensure that we do exercise our rights to cultural heritage, and that we use this document to ensure that this new phase of the social movement for archives continues, because it won't continue without these people that are here this week. And we have to be advocates for our archives, for not only the archives that we have within our tribe, but those that are in other locations, that it's our responsibility to ensure we bring those back or make sure they're returned in some way digitally so that our tribe can have those records and share them with the community. And I think in all, again, it just comes down to being an advocate for the collections that you care for. We're all here this week to learn specific things and to take those back to our community, but it's also important that you remember the bigger picture of ensuring that you're always an advocate for the collections that you have and for those in the future, and that the job that you do and that you do for your community is so important. wearing so many different hats to preserve the documents, to raise money, to be a management of the staff. But I think the most important thing is just being an advocate for all the work that you're doing and ensuring that you continue that on to be an example for your community. Because if they don't have that, they may think that it's not important, or they may think that somebody else is going to do it. But if we don't have the wonderful people like you here this week, it won't continue. So I thank you so much.
Well, we have this facility till 8 o'clock, so that's what, how much time? Well, please, enjoy the time we have left, and then I think for those of you that want to walk, it's a beautiful evening out, you can do that before you head back to Halsell Hall. There's still food, other refreshments, so please make yourself at home. Thank you.